She had rehearsed this moment for 7 years. The expression she would wear, the words she would not say, the exact way she would stand when she finally walked through that door again. And when the morning came at last, she found she did not need any of it. She simply looked up at him and let him understand. The entrance hall of Ashford Park is full of men, solicitors with leather cases, a sheriff's officer with papers tucked under his arm, an estate manager whispering something urgent to the man at the top of the marble staircase, that tall, gray-templed man whose jaw has gone tight, whose face has just lost its color, who is staring down at the woman in the green traveling cloak as though he is watching the floor give way beneath him. She does not move. She does not speak. She has not come here to speak first. He has not yet understood what he is seeing, but he is beginning to. Before I take you back to where this all began, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you right now? Are you in bed, or on your morning walk, or sitting somewhere you probably shouldn't be? Wherever you are, I am so glad you found us. This is Time Secrets, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I need you to do that before this story ends, because I promise you, the ending is the part you will want to tell someone about. Now let me take you back 7 years, to the night that started everything. Her name was Elara Voss, and she had learned very early that the world did not offer much to a clergyman's daughter with no fortune and no connections, but it did occasionally offer work. She had been at Ashford Park for 5 years when the story began in earnest. She was 24 years old, employed as lady's companion to the Dowager Duchess of Ashford, and she was good at it, quietly, efficiently, invisibly good, which was exactly the kind of good that kept a woman in her position employed without ever being noticed. She knew the household accounts better than the steward did. She knew which suppliers inflated their invoices in October, and which tradesmen could be managed with a polite letter rather than a legal one. Every evening, after the Dowager retired, she sat at the small writing desk in her room and recorded the day's figures in a leather ledger she kept for no one but herself. Numbers were honest. They did not tell you what you wanted to hear. What Elara wanted, though she had no language for it that felt safe, was to be known. Not celebrated, not elevated, just genuinely seen by one person who chose her. She had spent her whole life being useful. She wanted once to be chosen. And she was afraid, in the way you are afraid of a thing you've never said aloud, that she was not the kind of woman who got to want things for herself. The Duke of Ashford had been back from London for less than an hour when Elara first occupied the same room as him. She had not known he was returning early. Nobody had. He came back the way men of his particular disposition come back from a journey that has not gone as planned, quietly, without announcement, needing the room where he could think, which was the library, which was where Elara was sitting at the far reading table, with 3 of his estate ledgers open in front of her, and a page of her own calculations beside them. Edmund Cavendish, 6th Duke of Ashford, was 33 years old and had been told what to do, who to marry, and how to conduct himself since he was 8. He had complied with every instruction. He believed at that point in his life that compliance was the same thing as goodness. He was a man who could reshape lives through a single decision made in a single morning, and he knew it. And he carried that knowledge the way some men carry a weapon, carefully, pointed away from people. He stopped in the doorway. She did not look up immediately because she had not heard him over the scratch of her own pen. When she did look up, she did not startle. She simply went still. He crossed the room. He looked at her calculations for a long moment without speaking. The paper was covered in her small, precise hand. Columns of figures, a summary at the bottom with 3 words circled twice. "You found Harwick's discrepancy," he said. It was not a question. 3 years of it, she said. The method changes every 6 months, which is why it survived the annual review. He looked at her then, not at the papers, at her, the full attention of a man who had not given his full attention to anyone in a very long time. "How long have you been watching the accounts?" "Since I arrived," she said. He sat down on the opposite side of the table. Not because propriety permitted it, because he forgot for a moment that propriety required him to leave. The ledger lay open between them, like something neither of them had planned. Outside, the October light was fading over the park. Neither of them moved to call for candles. That was where it began. What grew in those months had no name that either of them would have dared to use. It lived in the library, mostly. In the afternoons when he returned early and she was already there, in the conversations that were always technically about the estate and never actually about the estate. He trusted her judgment in the way that people only trust the judgment of someone they have also, without meaning to, started trusting entirely. Then January came, and the dowager died, and the household changed its shape. There was no longer a position called lady's companion at Ashford Park. Elara had 14 days, a modest severance, a reference letter that honestly described her competence and could not describe her connections, because she had none. Edmund said nothing to her directly for 11 of those 14 days. He conducted his grief in private. He did his duty. He made his arrangements. She understood, with the precision she applied to everything, what that silence meant. Not cruelty. Something worse than cruelty. A man who would always choose the road that duty had already paved for him, regardless of what stood beside the road. On the 12th day, he came to her room. She knew she should send him away. She understood exactly what it would cost her. The ruin of it, the vulnerability, the fact that she would be the one who paid the full price while he returned to his life unchanged. She picked up the cost and examined it clearly, the way she examined every figure, and then she set it down. She did not send him away. 6 weeks later, Elara was gone. She had left on a Tuesday with a trunk, her ledger, and a secret she had not yet named to herself. Edmund was in London. The household had resumed its shape. To anyone watching, the matter was resolved. Then she wrote the letter. It went to Mr. Barrow, the Duke's solicitor, and it was very short. It said that she was carrying his child, that she required nothing except the truth of whether he intended to claim responsibility, and it was signed, with characteristic precision, Elara Voss, formerly companion to the Dowager Duchess of Ashford. Mr. Barrow brought it to Edmund. Edmund read it twice. He folded it carefully and placed it in his inner breast pocket. "See that she is provided for," he said. "A cottage, a quarterly allowance, nothing more. The arrangement is to be private." Barrow asked, "And if she refuses, Your Grace?" Edmund said, "She will not refuse. And now I need you to stay with me." Because what Edmund did not know in that room when he folded that letter and said those 4 words, "She will not refuse," was that Elara Voss had already decided not what to accept, what to become. How does a woman with no family, no connections, a small allowance, and a child coming turn that into the power we saw at the beginning of this story? Stay with me, because the answer is the whole point. Elara accepted the cottage. She accepted the allowance, and she used every penny of it over 5 years to buy something. Not furniture, not comfort, debt. Her father had died owing a man in Bristol named Aldred Marsh, a retired merchant banker who had thought his whole career that women ought to understand money and had never found one willing to be taught. He began writing to Elara in 1817. Their correspondence was, on the surface, a discussion of estate management. In practice, it was an education. She learned that the London banking house, holding Edmund's consolidated Northern colliery debts, had run into difficulty after the crisis of 1819. She learned that distressed debt from that arrangement was being sold on the secondary market at significant discount. She bought it. Every parcel she could reach, through a solicitor in Bath acting under a trust arrangement, in a name that was not yet hers but would be. By 1821, she held enough of Edmund's debt to be recognized as a senior creditor of record. The smaller estate she acquired first, a Wiltshire property that came through the same debt channels, carried a title, the Countess of Marlowe. She accepted that too, with the same quiet efficiency with which she accepted everything, and filed the documentation and said nothing to anyone who did not need to know. When the colliery arrangement matured and the banking house demanded full settlement that Edmund could not meet, the debt was acquired in its entirety by the trust. When a second collapsed lender sold a controlling mortgage on Ashford Park, Elara bought that too. She did not do this to destroy him. She did it because she had decided in a cottage in Bath, with a child who had his eyes and a ledger that kept the darkness at bay, that she was finished being someone a man could fold into his pocket and set aside. The plan was in motion before James could walk. It was complete before he started school. She arrived at Ashford Park on a gray November morning in 1822 with the sheriff's officers, the solicitors, and a 7-year silence that had acquired by that point the specific gravity of something real. What followed was not simple. The county drew its conclusions quickly and drew them wrong. The drawing rooms decided she was a scheming former servant who had used the Duke's own money against him, and 2 women she'd come to know in Bath received letters advising them to sever the acquaintance. Edmund's cousin, Lord Henry Cavendish, moved faster. He had a solicitor file in Chancery, arguing that the trust's acquisitions should be voided, and he dropped a word in the Right Club in London that the child might not be Edmund's at all. And Edmund himself called a meeting at the solicitor's offices in Derby. He arrived composed, coat straight, face arranged. He told her with formal courtesy that he was prepared to settle the debt in full if she would accept a lump payment and transfer the mortgage. He was offering her money to leave. She looked at him for a long time, long enough to see, beneath the arrangement of his features, that he was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the journey. She said, "That is not what I came for." He said, "Then what did you come for, Miss Voss?" She gathered her papers. She left. On the pavement outside, she stood in the November air and gave herself 30 seconds to feel the full size of what had just happened, and then she walked to her carriage. That night she drafted the settlement terms he had offered. She wrote 2 sentences. She stopped. She thought about the 12 days of silence after his mother died. She thought about, "She will not refuse." She put the pen down. The letter arrived from Mr. Barrow on a Thursday afternoon, with a note asking her to read it before she proceeded with anything. Inside was a copy of a letter Edmund had written in February 1816. It had never been sent. It was addressed to her in his own hand, and it said, not in the language of obligation, but in the particular honesty of a man who believed he was writing into silence, that he knew what he had done was wrong, that the cottage and the allowance were what duty permitted and what cowardice chose, that he had thought about going to Bath every morning for a fortnight and talked himself out of it by reciting every reason she deserved better than a life constrained by him. It said that he had written to a solicitor to ensure the allowance would continue after his death, regardless of the estate's condition. It said that if he were a different man, a braver man, he would burn the letter and go. There was a second document, a codicil to his will, dated the same week. It created a trust for the education and welfare of any child of Elara Voss, irrespective of legitimacy, funded in perpetuity, ring-fenced from every other obligation of the estate. He had built her a legal protection from inside his own estate, and he had never told her. She set the letter down on the table. She placed both hands flat on the surface and breathed slowly, the way she had learned to breathe when the thing in front of her was too large to respond to immediately. Outside the window, the afternoon had gone gray and still. Everything she had built her understanding on for 7 years had just shifted by 1 degree, and that 1 degree changed everything. She had told herself the plan was arithmetic. What a man owes, what is owed in return. She was good at arithmetic. But arithmetic could not account for an unsent letter. It could not account for a will codicil that cost him something and gave him nothing. It could not account for the fact that she had spent 7 years becoming someone he couldn't dismiss, and she was now sitting in a room alone with the evidence that he had been trying, in his own insufficient and private and completely wrong way, to keep her. Now I need you to brace yourself, because this is the scene the whole story was waiting for. She went to Ashford Park on a Tuesday evening in late November. She walked through the entrance hall, past the marble staircase, through the corridor she had memorized 7 years before, and she opened the library door. Edmund was standing at the window. He turned, and for a moment, neither of them moved, because the room held too much history to move through quickly. She placed the letter on the writing desk between them. "I read it," she said. The fire was going. The candles had been lit an hour ago, and the wax had already begun to run, leaving small pale tracks down the silver holders. Neither of them looked at those. "I told myself I came here to complete a transaction," she said. "I told myself this was arithmetic. What a man owes, what is owed in return. I am very good at arithmetic. I have been doing it for 7 years in a cottage in Bath, with a child who has your eyes and a ledger that kept me from thinking about anything else." She did not move from where she stood. "But I read the letter, and I need to know, not for the accounts, not for the solicitors, not for Chancery. I need to know whether any part of you wanted to send it, because if you did, and you didn't, then I have spent 7 years being angry at the wrong version of you, and I would like to stop." She looked at him then, directly, and without softening it. "I did not come to take your house. I never was going to take your house. I came because I am 31 years old, and I have spent 7 years building something real out of the worst thing that ever happened to me. And I would like, just once, just now, for you to say out loud what was in that letter, to me, in this room. That is all I came for." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a space completely. Edmund looked at the letter on the desk. He looked at her. Then he crossed the room, and he did not stop until he was close enough that she could see exactly what was in his face. The thing she had read there once before, on the day his mother died, which was the expression of a man confronting what he had been refusing to confront. "I should have gone to Bath," he said. "I am sorry, Elara." He used her name. He had not used her name in 7 years. "Not for what I arranged, for what I failed to say." She did not cry. She stood very still, and then she let out a breath that had been waiting a long time to be released, and the quality of the room changed. In that library, on a Tuesday in November, in the same room where it had all started with a ledger and a discrepancy, and a man who forgot for one moment to maintain his distance, she finally put the arithmetic down. 3 days later, Edmund went to London. He walked into Lord Henry's club and told him, in front of 3 witnesses, that the Chancery proceedings were to be withdrawn, that James Voss was his son and would be acknowledged, that any further communication on the subject of the Countess of Marlowe would be treated as a matter for the courts. He did not do this because it helped his financial position. He did it because it was the only thing remaining that she could not do for herself. Everything Edmund had failed to do 7 years ago had been done in private. The cottage, the allowance, the unsent letter. His correction had to be public, because private goodness had already proven insufficient. Lord Henry withdrew. The Chancery proceedings collapsed. The whispers in the county drawing rooms lost their legs when the sheriff's documents put her title on the public record. The trust was restructured in the spring of 1823. Elara converted the Ashford Park mortgage into a long-term management arrangement rather than a foreclosure. She did not take Edmund's house. She took instead a formal partnership in the colliery operation, structured with full legal standing in her own name. She moved into Ashford Park as herself. The green cloak went back in the trunk. James was enrolled in the parish school under his father's name, which he accepted with the equanimity of a child who has never understood why anyone would feel differently about it. He had his mother's eye for figures and his father's habit of going quiet when he was thinking hard. Elara and Edmund were married quietly that April, witnessed by a weeping Mr. Barrow and a Bristol banker who did not weep, but drank 3 glasses of wine before noon and felt justified in all of them. This is not a story about revenge. Elara did not come back to destroy Edmund Cavendish. She came back because she had spent 7 years building something real out of the worst thing that ever happened to her, and she wanted, at last, to see it clearly. What this story is about, beneath the ledgers and the debt and the green cloak, is the question of what we do when someone tells us, without words, without even meaning to, that we are not enough. Elara's answer was, "I will become more than you assumed," and that is what she did. If you are new to Time Secrets, please subscribe. There are more women like Elara here, and I have been saving them for you. And if you have been with us a while, you know there is only one thing left to do. The next time someone hands you a sealed letter with an unsent truth inside it, remember what she did. She did not run. She walked into the library, put it on the desk, and waited. She simply looked up at him and let him understand.